Okay, Paul, so it's good to see you again. And thank you for joining me here to explain what the impact model actually is and how you use it to actually start creating solutions to some of these social problems that we have in the world. So, Paul, why don't you start with telling me why you came up with the impact model?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess now this is a number of years ago. We were always, when we were meeting with and speaking with people in the corporate world who were interested in improving the ways in which they support social change, um, always trying to say, okay, well, thinking about where they are today in this space and where they would like to be in the future. And so it started out as a very kind of rudimentary thing where we would say, okay, well, if you were to think about yourselves in terms of your performance in this area compared to, say, other people in your sector or competitors or people you really admired, like on a sort of like on a map, where would you be versus them? And where would you
Yeah.
like to be? Well,
Yeah.
say, so say, I don't know, like Patagonia is up here and they're clearly leaders, or whoever it was, and it wasn't that people would like to be realistically think, well, we could be like them exactly, but maybe we could be a little better than we are now. So that started that. And then I found that literally when we were meeting with people in corporations initially, we would have a kind of basic map and say, why don't you just draw on there? What do you think, where you think you are compared to your competitors are, or, different things. And people were really drawn to that, like it was like, whoa, because they hadn't thought about it in that way before. And then we started to add a little bit more to it and think, well, what are the sort of the dimensions or factors against which people would be thinking about where they are and where they want to be. And so it turned into a kind of positioning map, with a number of different dimensions and kind of questions that we would ask. So one of them was the most basic thing, which is, in what ways are whoever is important to a particular company, say its employees and customers, like, to what degree do these people who matter to you as a company know about what you're doing in this area? And to what degree are they actually influenced by that? In terms of, I don't know, employee loyalty, recruitment, retention, customer loyalty, purchasing patterns, and so on. So that was, seemed to me a very important question, which a lot of people, surprisingly, did not know the answer to. And then,
so let's be very concrete, Paul. So you're already on the way to it. So what exactly is the model? What does it look like? What does it do?
Yeah, well, there are three kind of, it's almost sort of three-dimensional. It's taking what would be a kind of conventional positioning map and adding another dimension to it. And so the three dimensions of it are, one of them, which, as I said, which is the degree to which people are aware of and influenced by what a company is doing in this space. Another one is the ways in which particular companies are actually doing this work. So on the one hand, you have, people who are more transactional, donations, sponsorships, doing things environmentally that are all good, but kind of transactional, versus organizations that are, I would call them more transformational, organizations that really are first and foremost interested in harnessing in a more holistic way their resources in order to solve social or environmental problems. And then the third set of questions, third dimension on this, in our model, is really the motivation for doing this. Like, are they doing this for very altruistic reasons, say, on the one hand, or are these actions and activities intended to contribute to the profitability of their business?
Mm.
And so we started working with these different sets of questions. And one of the interesting things is there's no, like you could say, well, the best examples, say a Patagonia or Ben and Jerry's or Tom's Shoes or others, say, okay, well, these are companies that are all harnessing their resources to contribute to social change. They're doing that in a way which is very not a transaction, and they're also doing it in a way where all the people inside and outside these companies and brands know about what they're doing and are truly influenced by that. So that feels like, well, that's good, versus sort of the opposite, which is more common, which is that companies are doing things in a kind of light way, what I call CSR Lite in the book that I wrote, Change for Good, very transactional, without any kind of clear, clearly saying, well, we're doing this. They're kind of afraid very often to say they're doing it for business reasons, so it's sort of softer. And then mostly people, even inside companies, aren't even aware of what's going on. We see that all the time. So anyway, so those are sort of the opposite ends of things. But in fact, with this model, there's no right or wrong, really. It's really what's right for a particular company. And some companies want to be much more visible about what they do.
So if you have like, sorry, so if you had like a session with some business leaders from a company, and you say to them, okay, we have these 3 sets of questions, and when they answer these questions, that enables you to plot them in somewhere on your map, or how does it work?
And we started doing this, like literally we would sit around with people, leaders at different companies with this, an example of this map, which I don't know if we could share it on the screen, but if we could, be happy to share it. It's the one I said to you, which is in the Change for Good book. Would actually literally have them, go up and start to place where they thought their companies were against these sets of questions on this map, and then say, well, where do you think you ought to be? Like you're here today, where do you want to be? What would be optimal? And very often it's quite different than what it is now. And then the question is, well, okay, well, if you say you're placed here now where, say, not enough people inside and outside your company know about what you're doing in this way which is kind of ambiguous for ambiguous reasons, and you're not really addressing any serious social change, and then it becomes somewhat easier to say, okay, well, here you say you're here now, this is where you want to be. How do we get there? How do we start to move there? Which is kind of what the Change for Good idea is. This is the change, that we need to make. And then more recently, what we've done is partner with another organization called Emotive, who had already invented a very data-driven tool to assess people's stakeholders' perceptions and engagement with different brands. And so we've been working with them, and we have adopted that to apply to our model. So now we're able to still have those great conversations with leaders about this, and also to deploy a data-driven tool that is actually, like, if we want to know, in an accurate way, what employees believe their company is doing in this area, the degree to which they're aware of, influenced by these actions, we can do that, or any set of external stakeholders, customers, and so on. So now it's very exciting, really, because we're able to take it to a different level and to be able to actually have a science-based, a rigorous approach to pinpointing where companies are and then moving towards where they want to be.
Mm. So if I understand you correctly, when you've been through this exercise with these business leaders, then you have like two positions. This is where you are, and this is where you'd like to be. And that's the basis for finding the path forward.
It is. And as I said, there's nothing wrong, because there's sometimes, and there's no right or wrong. It's really relatively what's people believe where they want to be. Because I could think of some organizations that don't really care that people outside their companies know about this. Like there's some companies that are very modest, actually, and then there are other companies like, I don't know, like an organization like Starbucks, which is a very big brand, would be very concerned about that, and would be wanting to look at this in the same way they do everything else. So, but it's one of those things. I think back to, to times when we start every project with clients with this discussion, and then sometimes bring the data part of it in too. It has never failed to, when we're literally in a room with executives looking at this map, and then they're thinking about where they are, where they'd like to be, where their competitors are, where other leaders are. It's just, like, you have to come up, if you do certain kinds of work, you're always coming up with ideas and trying to engage people in different ways. Mostly those things don't work that well, because it's exciting to you, but mostly not to other people. In this case, it's just one of those things that as soon as we started doing that, it was just sort of magnetic, where people were drawn to trying to figure this out. And it was also good because it's not my opinion that matters. It's really people that are much closer to the reality in each of these organizations, each of these businesses. So it's actually very exciting. I love it. I love working with, groups of people to help them self-identify where they are and where they would like to be.
So, Paul, when you've been through this exercise with these leaders, and you have this map on the wall, what's the next step? How do you go on after that?
Well, then after that, it becomes much easier to map out kind of an approach to helping these organizations to shift from where they are to where they like to be. One of the things is it reveals who the most important stakeholders are in each case. Is it employees? Is it customers? Is it both? Is it investors? Like, and what are the priorities of those, of those groups? And then it also reveals, and you get into discussion about, well, what is this organization, this corporation actually focusing on in terms of social issues or social change or the SDG priorities or whatever it is that they're doing, and then gives us the ability to be finding out from the people who they've said matter most about what these social or environmental priorities are to them, So that's an important thing to understand. What is important to your employees? What is important to your external stakeholders? Like, what really matters in this space of social change? What is impacting them most? And then be able to compare that to what each of these organizations is actually doing. Sometimes it's very different, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it isn't. And yeah, and then also, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And so, Paul, can every organization do this on their own, or do they have to call you first?
Well, I think they can do it on their own. I think they both, you know, that's why I included it in the book. I would love people to be, because even if people are asking themselves, people in businesses are asking themselves these same questions. Well, you don't need us to help with that. And that's a great thing, because I think these are the questions that people ought to be asking, you know, what are we doing, you know, in this space? Why are we doing this? How are we doing this? Who are we trying to reach and influence here? To what degree is that actually happening? So, and it's the starting point in and looking at, you know, what are others in our space doing, or who do we admire? You know, it's those kinds of questions, and combined with how does all that resonate with the sort of DNA of who we are as an organization, where we started, what really matters to us, you know. And so it's ultimately it's the intersection of all those things that I think is what's most important, and people can ask themselves those questions just as easily.
Great. Paul, thank you so much for explaining your model to us and the readers.
No, you're most welcome. I hope it's useful.
I'm sure it is. Thanks a lot.